What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goodell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
Wow, Todd. We have a new president. What a day yesterday. Defied a lot of expectations that I had. I was wrong about so much. We're going to get into it. We're going to talk a little bit about it, but the election cycle is actually over. I thought there might be a post-election cycle that we'd have to talk about. And so what are we looking at now? I'm Kirby Goodell. I'm here with Todd Kent for Inside Political Science. Todd, what's your big takeaway from yesterday?
Well, the big takeaway, I think, has to be for everyone that there was a major defeat. There was a major shellacking of one party over another. You know, the polls came out, the polls were so close, and we can talk more about those, and so we expected it to be close, but really across the board, whether you talk about blue states, red states, different demographics, they all moved to the right or towards Trump. And so we don't know if that we'll have to do a little more retro, thinking about it. But that was certainly something that I don't, to that degree, that everybody expected.
Yeah, when we talk about Donald Trump, he's kind of a fascinating political character. He's got all sorts of baggage that he brings with him as a candidate. And so in a lot of ways, I think sort of the traditional view we might apply is say he's not a great candidate the way we would think of a traditional candidate. All he does is win. Well, I should say all he does is win, except in 2020 when he lost. But being able to come back like that after losing, we have to go back to Grover Cleveland, right? That's pretty unusual, and he's done a lot of things over the time that he's been out of office to really improve his standing with the public, and it was a decisive victory.
Yeah, if anybody says, "Oh, I knew this was going to happen 4 years ago," they're making it up. Yeah. Because you can really say he was down and he came back. It was one of the greatest comebacks in any arena we've ever seen. That could come back after defeat in 2020, everything going wrong on January 7th, and then to come back and win the going away. Is amazing.
Yeah, I didn't think he'd be able to win the Republican nomination. Once he won the Republican nomination, I thought he would have a hard time running again as president, especially with all his legal issues. He just kept going, and one of the things that I think that he does that we sort of see a good candidate do, he meanders a lot when he talks, but he always comes back to a big picture consideration. Things were better when I was president. Things are going to be better when I'm president again, and things are awful now. And he hits on that again and again and again, and he speaks to a certain group of people when he does that, right?
He really has mastered the idea of the kind of clear prose, where he says that when he finishes, you know exactly what he meant. I think you're exactly right. And so in a way, that's his kind of a communication genius, where he can deliver a message that sticks with you. He's got a couple of lines that he continues to go out. She broke it, I'll fix it.
Yeah.
That was his closing line. And really, that kind of encapsulates his whole message. They did the wrong thing, I'm going to do the right thing.
Yeah, my opponents were really bad. And not only really bad, they're the worst ever. Like it sort of drives me crazy when he gets into the sort of hyperbolic statements that they're the worst ever, I'm the best ever, I'm the only person who can make this better. But it seems to resonate, and it seems to especially resonate with voters who are maybe, well, we talked about it earlier, hourly workers, right? People who are maybe not as much professional class, but more working class. People who have seen their rent increase, who have seen their grocery bills increase, who are worried about the price of a tank of gas.
I think when we get a chance to study the exit polls and the numbers, we're going to find out the economy really determined this election. And it was this group of people who their hourly wages aren't keeping up right now, and they are what we call the working class. And we'll talk more about the Republican Party becoming the party of the working class. But it's this group who they're looking for somebody to help them out. They worry that their children won't be able to buy a house. They worry that they're not going to be better off than they are, and it costs more to put gas in the gas tank and buy groceries. And when they had, I think there was a mistake made among the Democrats saying, "Oh, well, inflation's not real." Or it's not that big a deal. And they're going, yeah, it's a big deal for me and my household. So I think that looking back, that will be the number one issue.
Yeah, and one of the things that Trump was able to do, we talk a lot about in political science, we talk about retrospective voting, and we talk about the question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? One of the things that I think is really remarkable, and maybe it's only because he had the gap between administrations, at the end of his first term, in the midst of the COVID crisis, the economy was not very good. Most people forgave him that because of the COVID crisis. And then Biden comes in and inflation goes up largely because of the COVID crisis and disruption of supply chains. And sort of slowly he starts to piece it back together. Biden never gets any credit for improving beyond the COVID economy. And people remember the Trump economy as being really great. And so when he's able to ask that question, are you better off when I was in office before or when these other guys took over, people resonated with that. And I don't think the Democrats ever did a good job of saying, yeah, things were good when you first started, but when you ended, they weren't as good.
For some reason, I think among a lot of issues, the Democrats' way of dealing with it was just saying it's not a big deal. It didn't happen like that, and I think certain of those issues hit home. Truly hit home. What's happening in your daily lives, and those were problems for them. If you take the economy and immigration, I think those are big deals, especially to the female the female voter, which Trump did exceptionally well among that group, which is a group that historically he has not fared well with.
And better than expected. Because going in, we expected to see even a bigger gender gap based on some of the polling. Yeah. And I've talked about the Democratic Party as being a little bit of a college professor party now, right? And all due respect to my colleagues and our colleagues in the various departments, we often feel like if only we could tell you, if only we can teach you and show you what the truth is, you'll understand, and what the reality is, you'll understand, and you'll come to our viewpoint. And the Democratic Party has a little bit of that to them, and especially on the economy. They tended to want to explain, whereas Trump just acknowledges, yeah, things are bad for you. I'll fix them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think there is. And, if I look back to the Republican Party of 10, 12, 15 years ago, there was a lot of that there. The Republicans kind of were the college educated, the party of the rich, and kind of knew better. We knew how things worked. And I think we've seen this reversal. We've seen this kind of transition that's gone on where the Republican Party, I think this last election kind of solidified the Republicans as the party of the working man. Mm-hmm. And it's a total change from the Republican Party that I watched growing up.
Yeah, we're both in the Bush school, and we remember when George H.W. Bush was running for president, the economy really wasn't as bad at the time by sort of objective economic signals, but the Clinton campaign was, it's the economy, stupid. Everything was about the economy. And the Bush campaign kept coming back and saying, the economy's not that bad. You all have to that's not a winning message in a political campaign. If voters feel like they're struggling, if they feel like things are not as good, it may only be perception, but perception is reality.
It is, and you're right. And I think how things are framed is really important, and we saw that a lot in this campaign. This idea that things aren't that bad, or that's not an important issue, and so that's not the way to attack it. So I think there's going to have to be some kind of looking at what was the messaging, and I think you found that the Republicans across the country found some winning messages. Mm-hmm. One was, I think, boys and the girls sports. Mm-hmm. I know that here in Texas, that was just almost every other commercial was on that. And I think that we'll see that probably across the country, we're going to see a lot of the same kind of type thing and that probably resonated with moms, of daughters that said, well, that's not what I want. Yeah. And but we kept saying, but they kind of doubled down on it. Mm-hmm. And so there's it's kind of this what we call retail politics. This kind of getting back to the person. And I think in a way, Trump really was a master at that. And one thing he did, we saw the results. In fact, I saw a stat that at 12:30 last night that over 1,000 counties in the U.S., Trump exceeded his vote by more than 3 percentage points from 2020. Now, and what was interesting about that says that his message was going out to his own people. So he was actually able to preach to the choir, as we would say, and bring more people to the table.
Yeah, and across the board, he did much better than we expected. He outran other Republicans. So if you look at on almost every state, I'd have to go back and look at my numbers, but I think in almost every state that there was a Republican Senate candidate that won, he outran them. He was ahead of them in terms of the vote. And so he's appealing to people more broadly than his party. And appealing more broadly than the Republican Party as the Trump brand. And that's something that, if you're watching politics, you just kind of have to say, wow, and especially going into this a cycle where I would have, if you had asked me to predict it, no way, that's not going to happen. He's going to run behind his party. He's going to run behind the Republican Party brand. The Republicans need to get someone else who's not him, who doesn't come with his baggage. But here we are. At least one of the things that seemed not to resonate for the Democrats wanted to make it about democracy, and yet at the end of the polling, as we're getting closer to the election, voters weren't convinced that Republicans were more of a threat to democracy than Democrats were, that Trump was more of a threat to democracy than the Biden-Harris ticket is.
Yeah, in fact, I saw on the CNN exit poll, of those voters who thought the democracy was a big deal, the Trump and Harris campaign, they split the vote.
Yeah.
So even those that thought it was important, they still half of them voted for Donald Trump. So I think there were miscalculations. I think one was kind of focusing on this democracy thing. Our democracy is in peril, and I think that the other one was abortion. It lost in Florida, but some of the states where there was an abortion kind of bill on or measure on the ballot, it didn't seem to move any voters. And the kind of the general reasoning is those states already had very few restrictions on abortion anyway, so nobody saw it as a big deal. Yeah. And so that was an area that they went heavily on at first and then kind of came away from it later.
Yeah, and so the Democratic Party was never really able to fully gain a solid message. But I want to be fair to the Harris campaign in this sense and see if you agree with me on this. We've seen across the world this year has been a tough year for incumbents and for incumbent political parties, and Kamala Harris did better than if Joe Biden had stayed in the race, but she did worse than Joe Biden in 2020. I think oftentimes when parties are sort of doing the postmortem, they say, oh, if we only had a better candidate, right. If only we had the person ride in on the white horse and save the party, we would have been able to win, and it was about the candidate. I'm not sure, given this cycle, it seems like voters were in the mood for change. It seems like there were a group of voters who felt like politics the system is broken, politics weren't taking care of them, the government didn't care about them, the elites were not working for them, and they wanted change.
Right.
And Harris for a while seemed like maybe she was tapping into that, but that means it's very hard to win as the incumbent political party in that type of environment, and Democrats just couldn't pull it off.
No, I think you're exactly right. There's going to be a lot of blame for Vice President Harris and her performance. But really, I think at first she couldn't figure out. I mean, she got in so late.
Yeah.
Couldn't figure out, do I run on the Biden-Harris record, or do I create a new one? First, I think she kind of decided to kind of go with it, and then decided to change her mind, and that was too late, and couldn't convince anybody that was really what she believed. And so then it kind of went on. So in a lot of ways, she started out behind the eight ball, to use an expression. She was considered the incumbent.
Yes.
And so anything you disliked about the Biden administration, you just threw on her because she was now the front runner.
Yeah, and if Democrats want to second guess, they can second guess. Should Biden have ever really been the nominee in the beginning? Should he have only been a one-term president? Should he have been willing to step down to open up the process? And maybe if you open up the process, you actually get a change candidate. And then once he decided to step back, should they have opened up the process to have more of a competitive process instead of anointing a nominee? I'm not convinced that it would have made much a difference in this particular cycle, given that the Democratic Party was seen as the incumbent party and voters were saying we're looking for something different.
It was interesting in the campaign. The Democrats seemed to they were going after the character issues, the character of Donald Trump, the things that have happened that he had done and things that he had said. Whereas Donald Trump did a kind of a really fairly good job about focusing on the issues. Mm-hmm. These are the issues these are the things that are wrong out there, and I'm going to fix them. And he kept going back to that, and it seemed to me like the character approach might have been wrong, because if you think about it, his poll numbers have not changed between 46 and 48 for the last 4 years. So everything you said about him, people have just like been there, heard that, and went on. Yeah. And so I think his focus on certain issues, the economy, immigration, others that really were able to stick with the voters.
Yeah, and as a result, he runs the table on the swing states. It looks like he's probably going to I never would have thought he could have won the popular vote. It looks like he's probably, we still got to wait a few days to figure out whether he won probably going to win the popular vote, run the table on the swing states, a remarkable electoral performance, a decisive victory. I don't know whether we would want to call it a landslide, but a decisive victory and a poll-defying victory.
Yeah, I actually think you have to call it a landslide. I mean, in my opinion, well, as of now, he's up 5 million votes.
Yeah.
I think George W. Bush, if I remember right, in his second election in 2004, he won by a little over 4 million. So this is quite a feat, and also sweeping all the battleground states is, and especially what was termed the blue wall, is significant.
Mm-hmm. And we were tracking the polls, and we were looking at the polls, and they showed such a tight race, and we knew that they might be wrong. It turns out they were wrong, but it wasn't a random error that was at play here. So that, if you were kind of looking and you're like, well, if it's random error, then maybe Trump picks up Georgia and Harris picks up North Carolina. Instead, the polls consistently understated Trump's support by about 2 to 3 points, and that's enough in all those swing states to bump him up and to give him, so he wins them all.
Yeah, no, that is Craig. There's going to be a lot of retrospection on the polling. Most of the polls had Trump ahead a half a point, maybe a point, certainly. So they did have that. They just underestimated it a little bit, and there's a lot of talk about non-response bias, people unwilling to say they're going to vote for Trump, or I think a lot of it could be some Trump voters are harder to get a hold of because they're at work and they're doing what they need to be doing, and so whatever it is, I think you're right. The polls were better, but they still underestimated Trump's support.
Yeah, and the error wasn't large, but it was consistent and it was systematically wrong rather than randomly wrong. Right. So so we missed Trump overall in terms of just how much momentum he had. I do think it's mostly non-response bias because I don't buy the shy Trump voter anymore. I feel like most Trump voters are more than willing to tell you they're Trump voters, whereas maybe in 2016 they were a little bit more reluctant. But the challenge is actually getting them on the phone. And what we do in polling is we get people like them on the phone, and then we weight based on that. But the Trump voter, and especially the voters who only come out for Trump, are going to be those low propensity voters who are hard to reach, who aren't going to talk. If you call them, they're not going to answer their phone. If you come to their door, they're probably going to be mad at you. And so those are the hard to reach voters, but those are the voters who made the difference in what the polls were revealing.
Yeah, and now that we're talking about the science of campaigning, I think you're exactly right. because usually what a polling organization will do is say, give me a list of people that voted 3 of the last 4 elections. These are likely voters, and we want to find out from them. But if you have a person that votes only every presidential year and only for Donald Trump, they're likely not to be chosen to be called. So maybe never even talk to him.
Yeah. Well, when we come back, we'll talk more about this, and we'll talk about some of the Democratic advantages, because I think there's more to talk about in terms of money and in terms of field organization, and why didn't that work? We'll be back in a few minutes.
Hello again, everybody. This is Dave South. Long before those 30-plus years that I spent as the voice of the Aggies, I worked as a disc jockey in my hometown of Wichita Falls. It was the early 60s through the late 60s. The oldies were songs from the mid to late 50s. Now, KAMU-FM has given me an hour each week to relive those times. Join me Saturday at 5, then a repeat on Sunday at noon. It's rock and roll, the 50s and 60s.
PBS Kids welcomes Carl the Collector.
Hello, Rock Collection.
Carl collects things.
The stickers are organized into special categories.
He collects a lot of things.
What's that? My bouncy ball collection.
Including an amazing group of friends.
We made you this friendship bracelet.
For me?
So add Carl the Collector to your collection.
What's more important than a collecting mission? Nothing. Let's go.
A brand new show coming Thursday, November 14th to PBS Kids.
Todd, one of the things that really I thought was really remarkable about this campaign cycle as well, Democrats had an advantage in fundraising. They were able to spend more money. They were able to get more advertisements out. They had a better field operation. Like, one of the things that I really love when I look at campaigns is seeing how they're organizing their field operations. Boots on the ground. I love boots on the ground. I love the idea of going door to door and getting people door to door. And Democrats had a great organization, and they had tons of money. And still, Trump seems uniquely mobilizing.
And I don't know if this is we're saying we're beyond the kind of the traditional campaign, and it's moved on to we touch people through social media or something. It obviously didn't work. The turnouts were lower. I don't know if that was lack of enthusiasm, high levels for the candidate, or if it just times have changed and kind of as the older voters age out and we replace them with younger voters, that they're going to be reached in a different way. But you're exactly right. We didn't see the advantages through that strategy.
Yeah, you expect money and field operations to have advantages. We're also, I think, at a point probably where we can talk about we're in a new party system, right? In political science terms, we love to talk about party realignment. This is a term that gets criticized. We don't need to go into that. But it really looks like, if you look at Trump from 2016 and especially now in 2024, you're talking about fundamentally different Republican Party versus a fundamentally different Democratic Party.
That's exactly right. And, I've said this for a long time, I don't think he thought of it necessarily, but the genius of Donald Trump running in 2016 is he was able to look out there and say, hey, there's a group of people that feel left out here.
Yeah.
And if you go back to 2012 when the Republicans lost badly, Mitt Romney was the candidate and then lost badly, there was kind of a lot of thinking as the Republican Party finished. What's going on? And there was certainly talk that we need to broaden the tent a little bit. We need to not just be the party of the elite or the party of the rich or something. So, that realizing there was this other group, and I think that was kind of the start in 2016. It kind of went through it all the way to 2024 when we see maybe not the end of it, but it's certainly moved when you saw Hispanic voters move towards Trump and with 5-7 points more, especially black males moving towards Trump. Yeah. That this is unprecedented, and those were traditionally the Democratic Party's base.
Yeah. One of the things I love about politics is people will write these things and then they will come back and they will be haunted by them later. But during the Obama administration, there was a lot of demography as destiny writing going on, that the Democratic Party had become the party of the young. because Obama had this cool factor to him, that these young voters were going to stay Democrats for forever and they were going to never move. And because the world was becoming more diverse, because the white population was declining and would no longer be a majority, the Democratic Party was on its way to majority status for forever, right? Not forever, but for at least a generation was the argument. But that didn't happen because parties adjust and they change their message, especially if they lose.
Well, you know, and I, as a political scientist, I would argue that the fruit of globalism that we're trading now with the world, a lot of jobs went elsewhere, which created this kind of populist desire out there in the electorate that said we don't need somebody that's going to take care of us, and that's where things begin to change. So thinking about it, do you think what are the chances that the Democratic Party today sits down and does a retrospective of what went on and thinks about what do we need to change? Because there's always a tendency to want to just incrementally change. Yeah. If we just do a few things different, it would have been a different result. Or is there going to be a wholesale look at what's going on? Yeah,
I wish I had a good answer for you. I'm not convinced that the Democrats are going to be able to do that. And part of it does depend on candidates and the emergence of candidates that challenge the party standard view of the world, who can run in the primaries and move the party in a new direction. And I don't know whether we'll see that from the Democratic Party or we'll see more of the same in terms of their approach to politics. But if they don't adjust, it seems like you are sort of the Republicans become the party of the working class and increasingly appeal to people who are in hourly jobs and who are working in those types of capacities, and the Democrats potentially increasingly become the party of the professional class.
Yeah, and you kind of think if you look towards 2028, who's the Democrat Donald Trump?
Right.
That messenger that can draw people and fill up the arenas because they have a compelling personality or message, and I think that's something they're going to have to think about is do you put the traditional candidate up there, and that becomes a losing strategy.
Yeah, and just so we're sort of clear on the Democratic Donald Trump, they wouldn't look and act like Donald Trump. They would look completely different, but they would move the Democratic Party in a different direction and adjust the Democratic Party to this new political reality, because the political reality right now is the Democratic Party is losing ground while the Republican Party looks to be gaining ground. Now, it's also the case, though, and that, politics is tough. Campaigning requires a certain type of skill, and Trump may be especially good at the campaigning side. Governing requires a different type of skill. And so if I were advising the Democrats, I would say keep your eye on 2026. Forget about 2024 apart. Do the post-mortem, figure out where you went wrong. But what you really need to be focusing on is the midterm elections, because you're going to have an opportunity to pick back up the Senate, to gain seats in the House and win the House. And it's time to start thinking about those midterms. Trump should be at a low point in his approval, and this is an opportunity for you right away.
No, I agree. In fact, I told a couple of colleagues that same thing, that that's the way you get over elections. You say, well, we have another election in 2 years, and so you move that way. And it is historically true that the incoming president has a rough couple years. Yeah. And then in the first midterms loses seats, and so it's really so close that losing seats probably means you lose control. Yeah. We saw that with Bill Clinton. He came in and controlled all the houses, and yet then lost, and then spent the next 6 years in a divided government. So I think that is exactly something true. And I got this morning, and I was talking to my wife. We were talking about the pitfalls that await Donald Trump. Yeah. That moving beyond the campaign, but now he's got to govern. He's made a lot of promises. Yeah. Probably overreached a few where he's made promises that he can't keep. Yeah. As all presidents do. But all of a sudden, when you begin to make decisions then people turn on you, and and because you're not doing exactly what we thought you would do,
Right.
that kind of thing. But it's hard because now you don't just represent a party; you're representing the whole country.
Yeah, and he promised to a lot of these voters that we've talked about who are in working class jobs, I'm going to fix the economy for you. I'm going to make your rent. I'm going to help you with prices. I'm going to help you with wages. And so there's a good chance, especially in 2 years, that's very hard to accomplish that. And then you have things like some of his policy proposals, tariffs, which seem like they could potentially increase inflation rather than decrease inflation. You have issues about immigration and how he deals with immigration, which also has other subsequent economic effects. And that doesn't even get us to foreign policy, like what's he going to do with the Ukraine and Russia? What's going to happen with Israel and Palestine? There's so much stuff, and and governing is much harder than campaigning. I was going to qualify it, but I think I'll just go with it.
I think
it's harder.
It is harder, and it's so complex. And I really think Donald Trump is a domestic president. We saw.
Yeah.
I think George H.W. Bush, in a lot of ways, was a
Yes.
international president. I mean, he knew the world order better than anybody. And I think Donald Trump is his focus is domestic. Well, he can make America great again. And so all these kind of things that he has to think about in the international arena, they kind of become problematic for him because they require a lot of time, and I don't think he's interested. And I think his voters aren't that interested in him.
Yeah, and in some ways they just want to pull back, but I know you're an expert in, among other things, of foreign policy. When you pull back sometimes from the world doesn't really let you pull back. The world comes and intervenes in what you're trying to do, and it gets in the way of your domestic agenda.
I can tell you from discussing these very issues with leaders in Europe is that they don't want the U.S. pulling back. They realize that they need a strong U.S. to be present in what's going on now. It was interesting in his first presidency. He made a big deal about NATO the members of NATO not paying their fair share, and now for the first time we're seeing more and more reaching their 2% GDP limit, or at least that threshold. And so his way of negotiating is to attack you, we see that a lot of leaders don't like that. But I think it's almost impossible for the U.S. to fully pull itself out of what's going on in the world. The world keeps coming for you.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that's a big challenge for an incoming president, and one of the things that they have to deal with, and one of the reasons they come in initially, they've won this big decisive victory. They feel like they are empowered to act. But it's not clear always what they're empowered to act on. And as you mentioned, as you do things, you lose support. So Trump and the incoming Trump administration has to think, what did this election mean? What did my voters really want me to accomplish? And what's the first thing on my agenda? What's the second thing on my agenda? And if you get that wrong, you start losing support right away because, you did tariffs instead of doing instead of immigration. So and so you lose support that way, and that's a real challenge for an incoming president. And especially when it may seem odd, but in some ways the decisive victory makes that harder because you feel empowered to do all these things at once, and you can't do everything at once.
Well, I think from my kind of looking at history of presidents, they tend to start off. It almost be better to have a rolling start, but they jump in there and try to do something, and then if it works or doesn't work, some people are angry. What they really do is to clearly articulate an agenda. That say this agenda is going to take a matter of time, and we're not going to do everything at once. And that seems to be a little bit of difficulty for Donald Trump in his first presidency, and then is to kind of have this really disciplined agenda. But I think that's what it's going to take, so that people understand he's going to get to that. He just can't do it right now. And that way, if you go back to Ronald Reagan in 1980 when he came to office, I think the inflation rate was at least 10% or more.
Yeah.
And high unemployment. And so what they did, they kind of with the Federal Reserve sucked all the money out of the economy. It was very painful.
Right.
And his numbers dropped. If you look at it, and it was just really painful. But really 3 years later, he comes out the other side and wins 49 states.
Yeah.
So is the Trump campaign or the Trump administration able to go through that pain that we need in certain areas to come out the other side better?
Yeah, yeah. And Trump does have one advantage. He's been president before. So in 2016, he was a political novice mostly. He really didn't know how to be president. If there is one advantage to him having lost and then come back, it's that he should come with maybe more discipline or at least a better understanding of how to work the levers of government. We've heard some conversation about that, about plans to replace people in the administrative state so that he has his own people in so that he can accomplish more. You would think with the legislative agenda, we're still, I guess, waiting on the House result.
Right.
I think. But we know he has the Senate, but with his legislative agenda, he should have some advantages having been a previous president.
No, I think so. I think his campaign was more disciplined. And really in especially the last 6-8 weeks, I think he was more disciplined. So I think you've seen a little bit of that. I think he'll have an easier time getting his kind of desired people that he wants to bring into his administration through the Senate now when you're going to have at least 52 votes as of today. But so there's going to be some advantages that he has. But I think it's that ability to lay that out for the American people. So I think they're willing to give you some slack if they kind of understand where you're going.
Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about and something that Trump did and Kamala Harris tried to do somewhat with is, and I've heard this proclaimed in different ways, that the age of big media is done. That now we're now increasingly going to be our candidates are going to follow this path of podcast, of less traditional media, less broadcast. If they're going advertising, it's going to be connected TV. What do you think about?
No, if I was a political consultant, I would take a class on social media and on that right now to make sure that I understood it totally. You know, I look at the surveys, especially Pew does a good work in this, where they kind of talk about where do you get your news from, and they do it by age, and you really see even among the middle age now are going to social media. So I think you're going to see a lot more of the podcast. It's the thing you can listen to on the way to work as opposed to sitting down the 6 o'clock news and getting that. And so I do. I think we're seeing a change in the way it happens. You know, you talk to our young people here at Texas A&M, they'll tell you that's where they get their news, and they recognize that there's shortfalls to that.
Yeah.
There's an accuracy issue, but it's so easy to do, and it's so prevalent that they're willing to kind of wade through that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably something that carries from the campaign into governing, right? Because I think you're probably with Trump, we can say maybe he's inclined to go to Fox News more than to a CNN or to an MSNBC, as you would expect. But maybe now that's not the choice anymore. Maybe the choice now is maybe he's better off just going straight to Joe Rogan, and that's going to talk to the audience that he wants to talk to, or to someone else who's doing a podcast so he can communicate directly to his voters as opposed to trying to go through any sort of traditional media.
Well, if you look at the numbers, when he was on Joe Rogan's show, 34 million people at least tuned in for some part, listened to it in some part. Yeah. Well, that's a lot more than you're going to get if you go to CBS 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
And, it was interesting when he turned down 60 Minutes for a number of reasons, but that was unheard of years ago because you needed the exposure. And now he doesn't really need the exposure. He wants selective exposure. So instead of it being like a shotgun, just shoots a wide range, it's more of a targeted approach, reaching the demographics you want to through going on those podcasts. He made the statement that his son told him that he needed to go and talk to some influencers, and he said, now my numbers are up 30% among young people. Maybe he's right.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that he could do to really mess with all of this, I think, and just want to get your reaction to it, is to go on this revenge tour he's been talking about. right? I mean, he won. He's been vindicated in a lot of ways by sweeping the swing states, possibly winning the popular vote. This is he should celebrate. Just leave that stuff alone. Focus on his policy agenda.
Yeah.
You think he can do it?
I don't know. I hope that he does. I mean, really, the revenge tour happened yesterday. Happened on Election Day.
It should.
It should have, yeah.
Yes.
And I really hope, as I would hope for any president, that the people are politics.
Yeah.
And then sit down and think real hard about who you're going to bring in, because a president can't run this country.
Right.
There's hundreds of thousands of employees that work for him, and so you need to get the right people in the right place that can help you be successful, for the American people. And so that's the focus, and I think that's what people will appreciate, as opposed to a revenge tour, as you say.
Yeah, and also with Trump, there's always the challenge of making sure that what we talked about, agenda and focus, his people behind him are often very good at staying on agenda and focus, but sometimes he can stray a little bit. And so that's the other thing he needs to do, is not get pushed around by 24/7 news cycles, and to know these are the things that I want to accomplish day to day, and to not get caught up in what's going on X or Twitter or social media or on the broadcast news.
I think one of the hardest things for somebody that gets that much exposure is to realize you don't have to respond to everything.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody else can respond for you. You know what I mean? That there's a way to do it that you can keep the focus on what's important.
Yeah. Well, that's episode 17 of Inside Political Science. Hey, we're not done. The election may be over, but we're going to keep coming back. We're going to keep talking to you about issues. We're going to keep talking to you about what the administration should be doing, how the transition is going, the key people filling into the administration. We're only just beginning, right?
That's exactly right. There's a lot between now and the inauguration, so stay tuned.
And then after, we're excited about get into the details about issues and legislation as we move forward. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you next time.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/Inside Political Science. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolicy@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.